I can. Sorry, I forgot to unmute.
I do it. Don't worry. How many of these do we do when we forget? Hey, don't worry. All right. All right, welcome everyone, those that are on Zoom and those that are in the room. Thank you very much for coming, particularly on State of Origin night. So we didn't think that through, but anyway, we will be finished in time anyway, and we all know Queensland's going to win, so you know, it's a bit of a no-brainer. So my name is Trudy Bartlett. For those that don't know me, I'm the Director of Regional Development Australia. And I've got Katrina Houghton from ID on a whirlwind road trip across 7 locations in 3.5 days. So a nice 1,500, 1,600 kilometres. And you guys are our second last workshop. So we're well and truly past the halfway stage. So you need to, please, I apologise in advance on behalf of both of us if all of a sudden we're calling you Baloo, Paru, Maranoa, you know, We'll be like your mum when she's really stressed and she would yell out every kid's name and the cat and the dog. So please, we apologise. It has been a rather long week. I'm going to quickly run through some RDA stuff just so that you know a little bit of how we can assist you, and then I'm going to hand over to Kat because the bulk of what you want to hear about tonight is some COVID data she's going to run us through, and then what we're going to do is get live on the site, which is publicly available for you to get on. If anyone is from a different council area, or if your footprint is another council area, they're all laid out exactly the same. So the good thing is you can go find, it'll be different data, but you can go find it. And tonight's more about just giving you a little feel for what is in there and what have you got access to. Okay, so RDA really quickly, there's 52 Regional Development Australias across all of Australia. We're partly funded by the Department of Infrastructure, and we can apply for other grants and do other things. We have a charter under the Department of Infrastructure, which I'll run through, but this is our big region. So we've covered a fair bit of that this week. Kupi and Baloo got missed out, although we did have them dial into workshops, which is great. And tomorrow we'll finish off with Warwick and then head back to Toowoomba, and then from there Kat goes back to Brisbane. So it's 23% of Queensland, and Kat's going to even show you some of that data that you can get from ID Profile about how many square kilometres it is and population and all those sorts of things. Under our charter and our funding that we do get from the Department of Infrastructure, we've got 3 overarching priorities, and one is, oh, we're going to be in trouble. One, I'm just going to turn off the video. Kat, I'm about to run out of power. It's just a small thing. Thank you. Thank you. The good thing about having 2 of us is we can tag team like this. So 3 overarching priorities. One is that we get more funding and more grants to the region. So for us, the big thing is that when it comes to state and federal government money, we want to see a bigger proportion and a bigger percentage of that going to Darling Downs Southwest, because straight away that's an economic impact. Just because you win the grant, you're going to spend it locally and in the region. And then secondly, it's a legacy of whatever you've just created or built that will be left for the region as well. So we want more grants coming to the region, and we help you out in 2 ways. One is exactly what we're doing tonight. We fund in conjunction with your council ID Profile so that you've got access to this data, and we want you to use it. The reason we went with ID and not some other data portals is it is publicly available. So we want you to use it so we get better quality grants going in. And the second thing we do is on the RDA website, there is a funding tab. So if you're not subscribed to our newsletter, I would recommend you do it. Tim updates those once a month, and he will just send you out a reminder that it's been updated. Just please note that those grants actually sit there 24/7 on the website. He just lets you know when it's been updated and if there's new ones in there that you want to have a bit of a look through. Okay. The other thing that I would say is there are a lot of grants for not-for-profits. There's not as many for business, but this document here is the Bible of all the business grants. There's more on the website, but this is a really good summary of both state grants and federal grants. So we will email this to any participants who are on Zoom, and you guys in the room as well. And just so you know, you do get a copy of both this PowerPoint and Kat's PowerPoint. So don't stress too much. You will get those as well. Our second priority, is actually progressing projects. So we help people overcome barriers. We get the right key stakeholders together because we're an independent organisation. We also, it's coming up. Good. Independent organisation. We are also quite often asked to facilitate getting players together, and they could be from the 3 levels of government, business, industry, community. We've got no skin in the game, so we quite often get used as an independent facilitator. And our third priority is that we feed back to the federal government. So we're on weekly teleconferences with our minister. So if you've got something that you think should be fed back to the feds, please use us as your conduit, okay? What you see on the screen now is our 4 portfolios. So each RDA is run by an independent board of volunteers, and those volunteers decide what are the priorities specifically for our region. So these are ours for Darling Downs Southwest. Usually I give everybody a little spiel about how we have this great tool called Economy ID and ID profile, and you should use it. But we're not going to listen to me tonight because Kat's going to run you through those, and she knows a hell of a lot more about it than what I do. But that's the link to the grant summary on our website. It's not hard. You just type in the RDA website and you look along the top. There's a tab that says funding, so you can't miss it. But that's the actual link if you need it. Okay, that is enough from me. I'm going to now switch to Kat, and she's going to run you through some COVID data, and then she's going to take you on a live tour of ID profile. Oh, I better let you share. Hey, there you go.
There, I got it. Can you hear me now? Yep. So the first thing that we're going to go through today is our national, state and local impacts of coronavirus. And at the moment, I'm travelling all over Queensland to give these presentations to various local governments, mayors, councillors, local community groups, so that people can get an understanding of how COVID is affecting them. And if COVID is a positive impact in your community, like we've seen over the next couple of days, what are some of the opportunities or challenges that are going to fall out of what's happening in the rest of Australia, globally, and also at your regional level? And there are some things happening at the moment that you guys need to be aware of and can really take advantage of. I think this is regional Queensland's time to shine, and I think we have lots of opportunities that we could take advantage of. So the first thing about our COVID impacts, why is that not? Is the impacts vary from region to region. So you can have a neighbouring council that is performing really poorly while you guys are performing really well. And it comes down to a number of factors. One, case levels. Are you a border location? Your service sector exposure, your international tourism exposure, and also your exposure to population drivers. So population drivers, those areas that are heavily dependent on population growth, are going to be in some real trouble over the next couple of years. So it's thinking about all of those factors and what they mean for your local government area. The virus is not yet under control. Now, in Australia, we've started to see it come under control, but overseas, this thing is wreaking havoc. And we've just seen areas globally that have just gone back into their second round of lockdown. So the virus is not under control, and that has implications for us both in terms of exporting and importing goods into Australia to put into our advanced manufacturing sector in particular. So this thing, I think it's 60,000 cases happening per day at the moment. Victoria is coming towards the end of the second wave, which is great, and we're hoping to hear some good news around border openings in the next couple of months with New South Wales and Victoria, and I think that's going to have some real strength, put some real strength back into the Queensland economy. The economic fall when the world catches a cold, we know that the impacts from this crisis are much worse than that occurred with the GFC. So the GFC mainly hit advanced economies, whereas this crisis has tended to hit emerging market and developing economies as well. So we've seen our world GDP fall below 8%. So it's really a really significant change for the world economy as well. Our major trading partners are expected to contract by about 3% in 2020. We've started to see a bit of a rebound in China, particularly in steel production, but we still have a long way to go. And anyone who works in any sort of manufacturing business will tell you that there are complications at the moment and supply chain issues that are happening all over the country to produce our goods. So the record is over. Quarterly growth in Australian GDP has fallen well below where we have ever seen it before in my lifetime. So we can see back in the 1970s, the fall away that we have had during the oil price shocks. We are significantly more challenged than we were during that period. We are now officially, Australia is now in a recession. People receiving job assistance payments has risen to 11% and has not fallen. That is job seeker payments. So job seeker is your unemployment benefits and your youth allowance payments. Okay, so it's not JobKeeper or ignoring JobKeeper. This is all about people on unemployment benefits. Hospitality sector has been hit the hardest. Arts and rec services, agriculture is still a lag effect there from what happened just prior to COVID, which was a lot of bushfires, drought. We know that the agricultural sector is performing really well at the moment. The productivity is up and we're seeing those numbers start to come through the data in our ag regions. So what's happening in the Sunshine State? And we can see Queensland has not been hit as hard as the other states. New South Wales and Victoria, the economic powerhouses of the Australian economy, which are dragging us down at the moment, have been hit by well over 8.5%. And we can see how the impact that has on our national economy. Queensland hasn't been hit as hard, and we are actually, you can see in the right-hand side, our payroll jobs, and you can see where we were pre-COVID at 100 there. We're starting to return to those pre-COVID levels at a much faster rate than the rest of Australia and Victoria down the bottom there. But unemployment here is much higher than the national average and more people have left the labour force. Participation rates in Queensland always tend to be a little bit lower than the national average, but we are seeing more people leave the labour market, and that's really a reflection of the lethargy around moving into a recession as well. So jobs growth recovered to July, but there's still an extra 150,000 people on job seeker. So job seeker and youth allowance compared to where we were pre-COVID. Coastal tourism hotspots with international market reliance were hit really hard, and the Brisbane CBD was hit really hard. And we can see here straight away, Gold Coast, Cairns, Sunny Coast, heavily reliant on international tourism. Sunshine Coast, not as much as other areas, but certainly COVID did have an impact there because they do have a reliance on domestic visitation. So when we had social distancing impacts, the Sunny Coast was hit pretty hard. Brisbane inner city, workers not coming into the city was hit extremely hard as well. You could hear a pin drop. And we've even started to see in the Brisbane CBD how the structural changes that are taking place as people are reluctant to go back to work full-time working in the city now that they've had the opportunity to work from home and use new technologies. Now here, that's our regions ranked in terms of our greatest fall. Now we want to look at who is recovering the quickest. Okay, and our regions ranked in terms of our closest return to payroll jobs. So these are jobs that you offer in your community. Toowoomba, Central Queensland, Moreton Bay South, Brisbane East, Mackay, Isaac, Whitsunday. Now those regions, most of them offer ag or they offer mining. And that's really what's driving the growth in those areas. Domestic visitation to regional areas has increased substantially. Google mobility data is a really good one to look at. It's free. So you can actually go online now and look at your Google mobility data for Goondiwindi, which is great. So Scenic Rim, you pick up this data and you can look and see how people are moving throughout your community. We're not sure how long the data will be free for, but it's certainly something that's allowing us to monitor those tourism changes in domestic economies. In the last slide, we'll drill down right into the local impacts. Yeah. So we can see there domestic visitation, those areas that have embarked on domestic tourism and really started to ramp up their products and thought about how they were going to market to domestic tourists have done extremely well in this market. There is a very large pool of excited travellers in Brisbane that are wanting to get out. There is a large pool of travellers in Sydney and in Victoria, in the very populated districts that are wanting to get out and travel. If you visit I was saying to Trudy the other day, if you visit a camping store in Brisbane at the moment, it is unbelievable the amount of people that are in there and the lack of stock, and they've said it's just gone crazy. Land sales are up in a variety of regions on the outskirts of Brisbane. So Scenic Rim, we do a lot of work with Scenic Rim. Land sales are up on what they were pre-COVID. Land sales are up in places like Rockhampton, Yeppoon, Cairns. So people are on the move. People are using this time to make lifestyle changes, and it really is an opportunity for local regions to get on board. So Queensland is more vulnerable than other states to international flight restrictions. So places like Cairns, Brizzy, Gold Coast, very vulnerable in this situation. When we look at the marketing strategy that the Gold Coast uses, it is traditionally targeted towards international tourists. And when you look at the rebound of the Sunshine Coast versus the Gold Coast, you can see the Sunshine Coast has had a much quicker turnaround than the Gold Coast. They, I guess, relate to the domestic tourist on the Sunshine Coast a lot better than the way the Gold Coast relates to that domestic tourist. So it's really thinking about how we change that strategy for some of those regions. But we're less vulnerable in terms of our international students. So Queensland is not as dependent on international students. In places like Sydney and Melbourne at the moment, there's entire apartment blocks that are sitting empty with empty cars as students didn't return during that March period to start university. So Queensland will experience much slower population growth due to falls in overseas migration, less domestic movements. However, we know that once national restrictions come away, we may see an influx and experience more domestic immigration at that time. Queensland is much more dependent on net interstate migration. This is a real opportunity for us. The last time this happened in our history in the 1990s, when Victoria was hit harder than any of the other states, we saw a significant increase in Victorians moving to Queensland. So it's going to be really interesting to see once the borders open. I work with a couple of real estate agents in Brisbane at the moment, and the amount of people buying property without a viewing is up. So there is movement, there are things happening, there are opportunities to take advantage of these guys as they look to make a lifestyle change. So it's a bumpy road to recovery, guys. And the first phase that we went through, which we're very lucky in Queensland, we went through this a couple of months ago or 3 or 4 months ago, we had our social distancing impacts and what that meant for our main street, what that meant for our coffee shops, our accommodation providers, all of those sorts of things. The next phase that we enter, which our metro areas are really feeling the pinch on, is our falling investment and spending as people start to hold on to their money a little bit more, and we stop investing in our businesses as quickly as we would prior, simply because people are just a little bit nervous about what's happening in the economy. The next phase we're going to go through is when that JobKeeper program ramps down, and what does that look like for our community? Are we vulnerable during this period? Some places aren't. We're in St George today. They are not vulnerable. They have nobody on JobKeeper allowance in their entire local government area. So it's ensuring that we use this data to be able to look at and say, well, let's dispel some of the myths for a start, that we have all these people on JobKeeper and when it finishes, we're all in a huge diabolical mess. That's not necessarily the case. And then we also have those long run structural changes that are going to occur in our communities as more people Zoom, as more people change their habits around consumer spending, as they change their habits around visiting places. You know, you just see when we come here tonight and filling out forms to be able to come to a location, you know, minimum, maximum numbers, all of these sorts of things. So it's really interesting the way the economy is going to change. So households and businesses have cut spending, savings ratios are up, and business spending on R&D is back to our 2006 levels, which is something we're going to need to watch as a nation. So many jobs are vulnerable when JobKeeper is removed. We know that there's about 81,000 people in Queensland on JobKeeper at the moment, but working 0 hours. So we have to be careful with this data, because JobKeeper is a really funny one, the way that it's reported. Until we really get to that March period, that's when we're going to have a really good idea of what this looks like. But you can see the areas there straight away. Douglas, Whitsunday, Noosa have a higher proportion of people accessing JobKeeper. Okay, and we understand the reasons for that. They are tourist and visitor dependent. They do not have diversified economies. They are driven by tourism and visitation. So we can see how hard those areas have been hit. The Queensland economy is expected to outperform the nation, and we know that Queensland's already on the road to recovery. So we know that Queensland at the moment is performing quite well. So let's have a look at our regional impacts. And we can see initially the largest job impacts were in our regional areas, but this is starting to move into the next phase, which means that we can start to see our metro areas starting to carry a lot more of the burden. And if you look here, you can see up the north, the darker the shade of red, the largest fall in payroll jobs. We can see there up the top, Cairns, Douglas. Down in the corner, we've got the Gold Coast, Sunny Coast, Noosa as well, and the impacts it's had on those areas. So this is our job seeker changes in Queensland. Once again, border locations have fared worse than other areas in Queensland. We also know that, of course, we can see in our southeast Queensland inset there the impact on the Gold Coast, Brizzy, Sunny Coast and Noosa as well. So ag regions are much less exposed, but prior to this crisis, we had an ag crisis around drought and bushfires as well. But we do know that local demand is starting to come on as restaurants start to open. We're seeing in the Brisbane area, and I live in Moreton Bay, restaurants are full again, people are getting out and about. It's starting to go back to business as usual, as interesting as that is, but the global economic growth is weak. So this is our framework to understand regional impacts. And I'm not going to run through all the bits and bobs because you'll get this presentation, you can have a good look at it. But really that's those social distancing impacts, the geographic and place impacts, which are out here on the right. International tourism destinations were hit hard. CBDs and activity centres. So CBDs can be the CBD of St George, can be the main street of Cunnamulla. It can be any of these activity centres where people congregate to get their breakfast, coffees, whatever it might be. It's really ensuring that those areas, we keep in mind how we rejuvenate those areas and also keep them clean, you know, creating a nice amenity as we get more visitation to our regions and we put our hand up for some of those people. that are looking to travel at the moment. So really ensuring that we keep those localities humming along. The falling investment and spending, export-focused economies have been hit hard. Any population-reliant regions as well as savings rates increase. And then there's the long-run damage and opportunity. So really thinking about how we can take advantage of those opportunities in our local areas. So the Goondiwindi recovery. So how is Goondiwindi performing? Now, one of the telling tales is the economies that actually were performing quite well before the crisis have performed quite well during the crisis. So it's really a story of how well did we go into this and how strong were we. And if you look at somewhere like Toowoomba, Toowoomba went into the crisis quite strong. Very diversified. Cairns Regional Council area is another area that went into this crisis very strong and have fared pretty well considering 30% of their visitation is from international tourist destinations. Cairns is performing well. They're actually performing better this September than they were performing last September in terms of their gross regional product. So it's really interesting how they've come out of that. They've really diversified. So we can see coming into this, Gundi was coming off a sort of a 3-year period there where we had some downturn in the local economy, and part of that would be driven by ag. But your industry base is a lot less vulnerable than other regions. So ag, healthcare, retail trade in there, construction, education and training are our main industry employers in this region, which allows this region to soak up some of the vulnerabilities that come with COVID. So Goondiwindi is outperforming the rest of Queensland. And we can see here the GRP change. Now, this is the GRP change from this September to last September. So this is pre-COVID. And what we're dealing with now, you guys are up by 18.8% in terms of your gross regional product. And we can have a look at what that's been driven by. Your local job change is up by 1.8%. If you didn't have JobKeeper, it would only be up by 1.3%. Okay, so there are some jobs being kept by JobKeeper in this community, and your employed residents change has increased by 3.3%. So similar to all of the other regions in Western Queensland, Gundy's performing pretty well. Similar to Toowoomba, Toowoomba has fared pretty well. Similar to Cookshire Council in the north, you would think that nothing had happened. So it's really interesting how a number of regional areas have bounced back very, very quickly. And we can see here, this is almost flipped on its head here. So we've got our positives down the bottom, and you can see compared to regional Queensland, Queensland, Australia, Gundy is in a very positive position. And what is driving that growth? So we can see ag, forestry and fishing, healthcare and social assistance, manufacturing, electric, gas, water, education, right down to administrative and support services. We're seeing growth in output. Now, part of this is because you guys are a local sales orientated economy as well. So you're not as reliant on visitation to create that output. Goondiwindi local jobs compensated by JobKeeper, and we can actually count those jobs. So in healthcare and social assistance at the moment, we have 9 people being compensated by JobKeeper payments. Okay, in accommodation and food services, almost 7, education and training, just over 3, retail, just below 3. So we can actually count those jobs and who is accessing those payments. So we did have an increased number of job seeker recipients, and you'll see when I go through the program, you can actually we can give you those numbers around who is actually accessing job seeker. Okay, so we can see from March to September, we had an increase in the number of people accessing those payments. What we want to have a look at, and Gundy's third there, guys. What we want to see is has there been some recovery? And we can see. And as we can see here, we have had some recovery since July. So we've had some people come off those job seeker benefits, and it's being able to, this is updated monthly, this data. It's really great data. We've been given access to it by Treasury, which is that there's been a lot more data sources that they've given us access to during this period so that we can analyse. And we can see there that Gundy is coming back. Some places we've seen an increase in the amount of people having job seeker, but when we look at the numbers, they're actually very small. So as we move to recovery, some of the opportunities, tourism plans, targeting domestic tourism is going to be really important. People are willing to travel. They are have lots of annual leave. They have gotten a taste of a little bit more freedom, and they are wanting to access different experiences. Activity centre strategies to deal with high vacancies, just things around making sure that we have that livability and we keep that livability high in our communities. And we were in Cunnamulla last night, and I said, this is a really nice, it's really tidy, it's really welcoming, it's a really nice community to go and visit. Infrastructure projects, grant applications are going to be highly competitive. There'll be lots of opportunities for that, should say remote working, co-working spaces, things like that as we evolve through this period of what does work look like now. You know, agriculture, food, people are looking for safe, high quality, local produce. Scenic Rim did the Scenic Rim farm box, and it went incredibly well. It went gangbusters. They advertised it through Brisbane, and I think every single person that I knew had this bloody Scenic Rim farm box with fruit, veggies, you could get bacon. All what they did, the council, was they went around to all of their producers and they created this Scenic Rim farm box, and people could go online and tick exactly what they wanted, and they would deliver it to people all over Brisbane. And it was a fantastic idea because people couldn't leave their homes or whatever it was. And so more people were cooking, using the local produce, and started to get an idea of what was actually available on their doorstep around camel's milk, all sorts of, you know, what I would call crazy stuff. But, you know, being able to tap into a market that was constantly on their phones, people are looking for things, ensuring that things like our websites, our domestic tourist websites, are good, clean, easy to read. People are on their phones, people are looking for opportunities to go to different places perhaps that they've never been before. Growing local manufacturing, improving supply chain linkages between your agricultural providers and your food product manufacturers, or you know, those sorts of things. Transport, logistics, we've had growth in online shopping, skills development, thinking about the changing demand for skills. You know, what sort of skills do we need in our region? How do we train those people? What are the new skills moving forward? This has completely thrown, you know, our traditional skills. You know, healthcare now is moving. You know, we always wanted to have this telehealth thing. Well, now we actually have it. I even have it in Brisbane. I just do calls with my doctor now. So it's really interesting how it's shifted the way people work. Mental health programs, always really important, and new job trainer funds as well. So does anyone have any questions on the presentation before I get into the tool? Even online, do you guys have any questions? Okay. I'm going to stop this share and then share the other one, okay? She's good, good. This one. Okay. So no questions?
Okay.
Surprising? Nikki?
Hey, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can hear you. Here,
Okay. I'm fine. I'm fine.
Good. Good to hear.
That's on the screen now, that too.
Perfect. We're working.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to try and whip through this in about 45 minutes to an hour so that you can all get home for the big event. My kids love it. They love it. So I'll have phone calls soon going, where are you watching it? What are you doing? What have you ordered? What are you having for tea? It's a big event in our house. But anyway.
Is that where you had to get the slides?
I know. I was thinking I'll put it on camera. So chips for mum. Anyway, this is the RDA Darling Downs and Southwest Region community and economic site. So there's two different profiles within this one portal. It's our community profile and our economic profile. The first one I'm going to start with is our community profile, and this data comes directly from the census. So it's updated every sort of 5 years. There are some data sets in here that are updated sooner, but this is your census information. This is the information that you would use as supporting evidence as part of your grant applications. Now, people say, well, but the data is getting old now. Yes, it is, but this is the data that they are using to evaluate your application. So until we get the new data, which the next census will be August next year, when we've got to rally the community and get as many people filling in them forms and getting the online forms done as we possibly can, because the more people you get filling it in is more funding you get for your community. So it's really important that we get that data, but that's when we'll be doing our big update for this particular site. So the community profile, let's start by going right down to the bottom. And down the bottom, we have this menu of items, and this gives me an indication of all the data that is inside this particular profile. So if you are looking at something like, I want to look at a household summary, I want to look at qualifications, I want to look at occupations, industries, whatever it is, come down to the menu and you will find what that topic is, and you can click on it and it will take you directly to that page. Okay, so it's a really easy way of being able to find exactly what you're looking for. The first...
We're about halfway through, so I'm going to make you all stretch your legs because it's good for you, and move forward, because then you will actually be able to see it better too. And nobody needs to feel bad about moving forward then. Nikki, you just got to stand up and do something physical.
And what are you on, ladies?
Is that easier? See?
Okay. So the first thing we're going to look at, guys, is our population highlights. And I like this page because sometimes when I get sent to regions in the middle of South Australia or New South Wales or something, and I don't really know what I'm talking about, this is the first page I'll go to have a look at their community. And what I can do is I can drop down into any of those local government areas and find the data that is directly related to them. So I'm going to hit Goondiwindi, and I can see here straight away exactly what this community looks like. So I can get a look and a feel for how your community, what your role of your community is, how much you guys earn, all of that sort of stuff. So we can see population grown by 74 from the previous year. Look at how we're changing over time. Median age, what percentage are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, couples with children, comparing to regional Queensland, and the rest of RDA, DDSW, older couples, lone persons, medium, high density, what you're paying in rent, overseas born, all of these different variables that I can get to give me an indication of what your community looks like. Okay, then what I can do, I can export that page into PDF and get it sent to myself, and I can have that on file so that if anyone says, what's the median age, or these are some good little things to have ready for your grant applications. And you can do it for any area. Okay, the next place I'm going to take you to, so that we can look at population, and that's going to break it down into how many are Indigenous, how many women, how many males, how many people aged over 15, all of those important things for your applications. Now I'm going to have a look at my 5-year age groups. You always get the question from the census. You always get the ability to export the page. And when we come down here, we get our area. Once again, we can change that to any of the various areas there. And then we need to change our benchmark area. So if we are going for a funding opportunity with the state government, you will need to change that to Queensland. If you are going for an application with the Australian government, you will need to change that to Australia. Okay, so tonight we're talking to the state government. You will always get this data table, and you can individually export any of the data tables or any of the charts. Okay, so if you want to put them straight into your application, you can do that. The data table gives you all your numbers. I live in the charts, where straight away I can go, okay, what are my dominant age structures in this community? And we can see here 0 to 9-year-olds, 55 to 59-year-olds are probably our 3 most dominant areas when we compare it to Queensland. So when I'm thinking about funding here, I'm thinking about, 1, how we can ignite our working population and get them into the community, how we look after our, how we provide for our younger demographic, but also out here, what are we thinking about in terms of ageing in place in this community? When we come down, that's our dominant age structure. What we want to look at is, how is our age structure changing over time? And here we can see, this is good news. We've got some growth in our working population. These guys falling away, these guys are taking them. And here we've got our ageing part of our population. So ensuring that we are keeping pace with our healthcare and social assistance, residential care services, what sort of housing are we providing these guys, all of that sort of thing needs to be taken into consideration. When we come down the bottom, guys, you get your dominant and your emerging groups. Okay, so you always get this commentary. You can use that commentary, you can take it out, copy and paste it and put it straight into your application. So here you export that entire page into Word or PDF. Okay, so that's that age groups is always a great one for applications, because it just gives you straight away an idea of how your community is changing and what sort of services do you actually need. Okay, the next one I'm going to look at is qualifications. And we can see here, move down, we've got our data table comparing Gundy to Queensland. Then we go straight down to our chart and we can see we have a much higher proportion of people that are not qualified in our region compared to Queensland. When we see how that's changing over time, we can see this is good. We're seeing some more people with bachelor or higher degrees, diplomas, as well as vocational certificates. So that's a really important sign, and it's really important. So depending on what you're trying to say to the state government will depend on what information you provide. So if I'm looking at skills training and I'm saying, well, actually, we want to increase the level of skills in our community, this would be a slide that I would use. I would be saying, well, at the moment, compared to Queensland, we have a lot more unqualified, people in our community working in our jobs or looking for employment. Absolutely. So here we've got our dominant and emerging groups analysis. And once again, guys, you can export that. Okay.
That data around training or skills, is that able to be narrowed down again into like Indigenous versus non-Indigenous within Goondiwindi, or is it that's into
You can
free program?
No, you can do anything really. So what you would do if you've got an application where you have to show how many people are not qualified and perhaps are Indigenous, that would be something I would email to Tim or Trudy and say, look, can we find out this information? And then I will go to we've got a couple of ABS experts in there that sort of can break down different things, and I would ask them. And if they can get it, they can get it. Most of the time we ask some questions like that and it's almost a challenge, and they'll say yes. And then I handball it on to Glenn, who's been out here before. He's very, yes, we need those people in the world. So then, so Glenn would then look at that. So what I say to our clients, and I say to Trudy all the time, is you need to think about, what are you trying to answer? What are you trying to say? What are you trying to prove? And if you're trying to prove that, look, I think in our community, we have too high a number of Indigenous people who are not qualified, then we can go looking for that evidence base for you. So it's really thinking about first, what am I trying to answer, or what am I trying to prove, and then the data can build the case around that.
Okay, because I had the same question, whether you could drill down further for specific information.
Yeah, that's right, Nikki. And that's It's if we put on every bit of information that we have from the ABS and broke it all down, this could explode, you know. So what we tend to say to people is we put on here 99.9% of what councils need, but there are often those times when a grant application may say, well, now we want to know how many people are employed, but how many of those people that you're going to, you know, how many of those jobs that you're going to create in your region are going to be for Indigenous people?
Great, yeah, because
Right, so then we can do that.
Yeah, I'm currently writing a grant proposal, and I cannot find the information everywhere I've looked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Put our details in the chat too for you, Nikki. The other thing that Nikki, she's commented on here about how much she loves stats, and we said we love them too. And I put in the comments here something I thought I'd better share, because we're very grant focused tonight, and we're talking about how you can use it for grants. But the councils who use this really well, and outside of councils like chambers of commerce as well, what they do is they get this and they use it in their investment prospectus. If they know a developer's coming and they're looking at ag or they're looking at manufacturing or all the rest of it, they go in here, they get data, they put that together and they present it. You know, even for your social media and stuff, you can see some of the graphs are really easy to read. So if you actually want to publicly put more stuff out there, even though this is publicly available, people aren't going to go searching for it. So what you can do is just take one of those graphs, which is a great thing to actually put as a social media tile. So all of that could be funded because we pay for it. We're allowed to use it for that method, you know. So you're not doing anything you can't do, but it's really good for, you know, chamber to give a snapshot. I don't know which end of council you're in, but, you know, even from a comms point of view, and probably one of the councils I would recommend you have a look at is Western Downs do this the best. Like their comms is Schmick. They've got 8 prospectuses for 8 different target markets, and they use the ag data in one, they use the transport logistics data in another, they use manufacturing in another, because they've worked out they've got 8 target markets that they're trying to track to their region. They do a really good job at it, so keep an eye on them. And then Mayor, if he's got to do a presentation, he will come to the ED department and say, all right, I've got to do a presentation on intensive ag, what data have you got for me? And they give it to the content. It's all pretty much 90% of it is actually sourced from this tool. Yeah, and the
So we'll get to that.
So we'll get to the content.
Yeah. So that's our who are we. We've got what do we do. So this talks about, you know, even things like volunteering, how much volunteering happens in your community, all of these sorts of variables. How do we live? I'm going to come into household summaries because this has an implication on council planning. And this talks about our couples with children, couples without children. It talks about how your household structures are made up. So when we come down here, our dominant house structure is couples without children, followed by couples with children, followed by lone person. Then when we move down and we see how that's changed over time, we can see our couples with children. So here's our families moving out. And we can see here couples without children and one-parent families is where we're seeing our increases in our community. And that has implications for planning around what types of houses do we have in our area. So once again, guys, dominant and emerging groups down the bottom. And you can export that entire page. I'm going to go to household size because sometimes these things differ. So let's come down here and we will see 1 and 2 person households is our main household structure in Goondiwindi. When we come down, we can see that rise in our 2 person household here, and we're seeing a decline in 4, 5 and 6. So it talks to me about, well, what sort of housing are we providing? What sort of developments are we doing in our community? Are we matching what the market needs? Are we providing spaces and places for people to age in place in our community as well? Toowoomba uses this very well. Toowoomba, their planning department, I work closely with their strategic planners around how they are going to really start to touch on their increase in lone person households. So Toowoomba has a significant increase in lone person households, and this has implications for healthcare in their community, residential aged care services, and they want these guys to be aging in place. The elderly are an important part of the community. They support safety and things like this. So it's really interesting the way they're sort of approaching that that part of the market. So here's our dwelling type. So we know how the population's changing. Now let's have a look at our dwelling type. So what we actually offer on the market. And majority of what we offer, over 85%, is a separate house in this community. Got a little bit of medium density here. Let's move down and see how we've changed, and we can see separate house and medium density is where we've really had some significant change between 11 and 16. So it'll be interesting to see what's happened since 2016 and where the council has gone with providing different styles of accommodation. Once again, our dominant and emerging groups down the bottom, guys, and some commentary. So the next thing I'm going to go through here is our job seeker data. Okay, so you guys can flick through some of those things, and some of them are just set at the RDA DDSW level. But here we've got the information that I was talking about before around our job seeker data. And we can see for Gundy, during that March to September period, we had an additional 161 people on job seeker and youth allowance. Then we can see in September of this year, we've got 537 people in Goondiwindi accessing job seeker benefits. So that's not job keeper, that's job seeker. And you can keep an eye on that, guys, because that next bit of data, October, will be coming out shortly. And then we see our chart that we had before, and you can just copy and paste those straight over. You can export them as well, but I just normally copy them to clipboard and then put it straight into my presentations.
And Baloo is not on that list. And 0 people in Baloo on job seeker.
The last thing to look at here, guys, is our reports. So when we come to our reports, we can actually click on here and you guys can download all of the information that I was just talking about. Need for assistance, employment status, unpaid work. And you can actually come down here, put your email address in and send yourself that report in Word or PDF. So if you want to go home and you want to print out some of this data, you can do that really quite easily. And I would advise send yourself it in Word because it's quite a big document, and take out all the bits that you don't need and then print out the rest of it. Okay. Some councils, Cookshire Council, actually put it together in Word, put in the bits that they need, rejig the wording a little bit. So they'll use the wording that we've got there, but then they'll add their own little bits in there, and then they'll send it off to a graphic designer and get it designed properly. And that's their community snapshot for the year. So it's quite a good little tool to be able to do that. So the next thing I'm going to look at is our economic profile. And this is really going to talk to us about our industries. Okay, now this particular tool has over 1,200 pieces of data. So there's lots of information in here for you guys to look at. So what I'm going to do tonight is show you the bits that I think are the most important for you to know and understand. And what happens with this data is it's updated yearly. Okay, so at about this time, every year we get a data dump. So we get given all of the information comes in. That information comes from the ATO, Centrelink, it comes from Labour Force Survey, it comes from Household Expenditure, Dun & Bradstreet. We look at all of these different sources of data that come in, and we put together the economic profiles of all of our local government areas across Australia. Okay, so once again, if we go to the bottom of the page, we have our menu at the bottom, and that talks to us about all of the data that's in there. So if you are looking for the gross regional product of Goondiwindi, you would come in here and you would immediately see gross product, and you could go to that page and have a look at what's happening in terms of gross product. So I'm going to take you this way, and you can see here economic indicators. Go to gross product. And we can see here what's happening for the entire RDA, Darling Downs and Southwest region. And then we can drill down here into any of the below regions. And we can see here, this is the chart that I took and put into the presentation before, where we could see over time exactly how Goondiwindi has changed. And you guys, not having local knowledge, would know that, oh, during that period, that was a significantly tough year because we had a bushfire, or we had a cyclone, or we had a whatever it might be. Different areas will tell me different things about what's happened. This is our cumulative change in GRP. So this is how we compare to Queensland. Okay, and we can see how much we've peeled away and moved away from the growth that Queensland is having. Okay, so depending on what story you want to tell will depend on which chart you decide to put in your application. When we come down the bottom here, we can see our annual change in gross regional product. So whilst we had a negative fall, it wasn't as negative as the previous year. Okay, and then we come down here and we get our actual figures. Okay, and this is where we can use those figures, as Trudy said, in marketing, on social media, all of those sorts of things, to talk about what has changed over that previous year. So that's our gross product. The next one I'm going to look at is local employment, because we saw today in St George that Ballon Council, same with here, had a reduction in their gross regional product, but they had a rise in their local employment. Okay, and sometimes that can happen as your industries that are your most productive slow down, but you may have other industries that aren't as productive that are growing in terms of employment. So they just don't add as great a value back to the economy. Retail is one of those sectors. And we can see here our annual change in our local jobs. It's performed quite well. And we can see what's happened here in terms of our change. 5.34% change in local jobs. So if you're wanting to talk about a good news story to your community, I wouldn't be looking at GRP. I would be talking about jobs growth. Okay, so it's really, that messaging can be significantly important for community morale and things like that. So this would be something I would be looking at and saying, well, this is a good news story for this particular area, because more jobs will eventually stimulate more growth. Okay, so let's go to unemployment. Now, unemployment's not my favourite statistic to use, but it certainly sometimes can help in terms of our grant applications, because it's something that grant readers or observers, people looking at your grants, telling you whether you can get them, will know and understand unemployment. So we can see here unemployment in Gundy is very low, and we can see we can actually get those actual figures around 127 people, 154, 207, 236, and you can get an idea of what those actual numbers are in terms of quarterly unemployment. Okay, all the way back to, I think, 2010, yes. So that's unemployment. Building approvals. So on this economic indicators, so this is our high level indicators. The next one is building approvals that we look at. And this is our year to date in terms of building approvals, and that information comes directly from council. Okay, so it goes from council to the ABS back through the sausage to us. And we can see here, this is the financial year up to August. So we still have a little bit to go to compare it to our other years. But this will give us sometimes an indication of what we're looking at in terms of our data moving forward. As you can see here in 9-10, we had this spike in terms of both our residential and our non-residential. Now that could be a road, that could be an upgrade to a hospital, that could be some sort of disaster funding, it could be a new building, whatever it might be.
That might explain that 2011 jump in the number of jobs.
Yes.
Because we got approved in 2010-11.
Yep.
Delivered probably in 11.
Exactly. So here we've got, guys, the exact numbers at the moment where it sits. Okay, so a lot of councils that we meet with either quarterly or half yearly, this is the figure they want to know about. Where are we sitting? What do we look like? Okay, because this will determine their construction capabilities and what's happening in terms of their employment in construction. So the things I looked at here, guys, gross product, local employment, unemployment, and building approvals. The next one I'm going to go to is my economic value. And what I want to look at here is my value added. And the reason I look at value added is because it talks to me about productivity and it talks to me about profitability of your industries. So output talks to me about what you're producing, but I want to know how profitable your industries are as well. So here, when we come down, we can see in Goondiwindi Regional Council area, ag, forestry and fishing is the most productive industry. Let's have a look at our table and let's set it up the way that we want it. So we've got our current area is Goondiwindi. We've got our benchmark as Queensland and we've got our comparison year as 13-14. The first thing I will do is come in here. So next year in February, March, when you get your new data, the first thing you'll want to do is compare it to the previous year. So here I'm comparing 18-19 with 17-18. So I can see what has happened over the previous year in all of our industries. So what's happening in our industries. And here we can see in that year we had growth of 4.5 million in terms of our agricultural, forestry and fishing. And we can look, guys, at where that growth has come from. So it's come directly from agriculture, and we had a fall in agriculture, forestry and fishing support services. So it's really important to be able to drill down into those subsectors. It's not just the high level sector we want to look at, it's those individual areas within it to see what's shifting and changing in amongst those sectors. Let's move down here, healthcare and social assistance. In terms of value add, we've had some growth. Hospitals, we've had some growth, medical and other healthcare services, residential care services and social assistance services. We've had some growth in value add. Had a decline in retail trade, fuel retailing, accommodation and food services is up, particularly food and bev. So let's go down to the bottom and have a look at our charts. So we can see here our dominant players, ag, healthcare and social assistance, construction, and everything else is sort of sitting around the same levels. And then we can see where our changes have happened. So our change in our value add between 17-18 and 18-19. So it's really important for next year when we look at this data to see which industries have performed well over this COVID sort of period and which industries haven't performed as well. And we can see ag is up here, healthcare and social assistance is really driving forward there as well. Yes. It's your NZIC code, yeah. So it's your code. So it's according to your code. So you always, you know, you need to keep that in the back of your mind. That's why I always look at, the ones I look at is, say, for example, if I've seen a decrease in food retailing, but an increase in food and bev, and I think, okay, you know, and I just keep that in the back of my mind, thinking that, okay, maybe it can be sometimes perhaps a reporting issue, because your data is only as good as what people put into it. Different, yeah. Yeah, that's right. So yeah. So it's bearing that in mind as you look at the data, knowing that the overarching, I guess, you know, implications would be small, but it's still just bearing that in mind. I always, when I'm looking at things, I'll think, oh, okay, you know, perhaps that's been a change in the way that's coded or things like that. Often what we'll do is we will troll through the data when it comes particularly from the census. So the census last year decided to in what they call impute a different, what would have been put as other, and they just distributed it through all of the different areas, okay, all the different industries. Which was a massive problem. So what we had to do then was ask the ABS to impute that same, use that same methodology in the 2011, 2006, all the way back, so that then we could show apples to apples. Now, some of our competitors didn't do that. So what it showed was these massive increases. So it looked like in Townsville, they'd created loads of jobs in certain industries, but in actual fact, they just took out a whole section and just threw it back, just poured it down the pipe, you know, which is a big problem. So we always make sure, and things like boundary changes, so that's all taken into consideration. If they change the Goondiwindi local government boundary, for example, we have to change all of our data sets right back to 1996, I think it is. So it's a really big pain in our, but we make sure we have to be able to compare apples with apples over time. It's the change over time that is really, really significantly important for you guys.
So in the case if there's sometimes a business that has one AGM but they have multiple businesses under it, ag's the flip side. The issue with ag is there's usually good accountants who get you to set up lots of entities and trusts and all the rest of it, and not always are they identified as ag.
You put it under a trust.
They kind of lease it out to each other, and then that gets leased out. But sometimes when that happens, they will have they won't actually put it under ag. So there's a whole USQ research paper around that. Our ag industry is a hell of a lot bigger than what it shows sometimes, because
Farmers, hey? Farmers.
But it is actually how accountants have advised.
Accountants, yes.
Yeah, and so let's blame the accountants.
Blame the accountants.
All over the place.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
And when I looked at them, I'm like, that's not fun.
Yeah.
I don't actually do that. But also they tick multiple boxes.
Yes.
That's what it's like.
It's the same with the census. It's and that's why I really stress the importance of the census and getting as much of that information and getting people to fill in that data as we can, regardless of whether or not it's, the user perhaps isn't 100% accurate. If we can get them 95% of the way, mate, we're okay. If you look at things like education, I think that's a really difficult one for people. My husband would say to me, well, am I classed as having a diploma or a, vocational study, or how does that, and so if he's having that, he's a relatively intelligent person. But, I think that, well, this is probably questions that are proving relatively difficult for people. So, I always sort of think about how the reader might interpret the information as well. But this gives us a good feel for what's happening in the community. So that's our value add, guys. The next one I'm going to look at is my local employment. Okay, so you guys can look at exports, local sales, imports, all of that sort of thing. But next thing I'm going to look at is my employment by industry. And this is going to give me a bit of an idea of where that employment growth was coming from. So we can see here, healthcare and social assistance was one of our big drivers, ag, forestry and fishing. We lost a few people in mining, which would probably talk to me about productivity. Retail, construction, transport, postal, warehousing, finance, insurance, education and training, adult, community and other education. We can move down here to our chart and we can see our big employer obviously is ag, followed by healthcare and then retail trade. And where we saw majority of our employment change was ag, forestry and fishing, healthcare and social assistance, which is no surprise because that's where we saw our shift in terms of our value add. Once again, guys, you get your dominant and emerging groups down the bottom. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk to you about is this industry focus. Okay, so some councils will have industries that they use as what they call their high value industries, like the Sunshine Coast has advanced manufacturing, they have tourism, they have health, they have, I think, transport, things like that, that they focus on primarily in order to attract investment into those areas. So what I'm going to go to is my industry sector analysis for Goondiwindi. And what I can do in here, guys, is I can drill down into any of my industries. Okay, so if I want to look at food product manufacturing and I want to know a little bit more about what's happening in Goondiwindi around food product manufacturing, given you've got a very strong ag sector, what do we have complementing that? And we can see here, we've got 68 people currently employed in food product manufacturing. 58 of those are full-time equivalent. We've got, this is how much our output, total sales, about 24.5 million, $6.7 million worth of value add. We export about 8.21 million. Most of that is international. So our food product manufacturing sector is vulnerable during this crisis. So I would straight away look at this and go, okay, well, that can be a bit nerve-wracking. I wonder how quickly they, could have, pivoted or changed to a more domestic market. This is how much we import in terms of our sector from domestic markets as well as international. So this also, sends me little signals around, okay, if we're importing these international goods to perhaps put into our final products, has that slowed production? How has that impacted the sector? When we move down, talks to us about our economic output per destination, by destination, and it compares that to Queensland. Okay, so here we are in terms of domestic exports out of our food product manufacturing sector. It's quite small. Majority of it goes to local sales, which is a good thing. And this is the component that goes to international. Okay. When we come down here, it also talks to me about my industry contribution to Queensland. So domestic imports is high. So that's our imports overall. Exports, so it talks to me about my industry contribution. Okay, so that's a really good tool to use for various sectors. So if, for example, we wanted to look at our healthcare sector. So I'm just going to click on healthcare and social assistance. And I'll come here and we can see this is how many people are employed, how many are FTE, what is my value add, exports, local sales. Let's move down. Okay, a lot of it's local sales in our healthcare sector, a little bit of domestic. So people might be coming in to access services from outside the region. Our contribution to Queensland. And then what the other thing that I can do, which is really cool, is I can look at my time series. So that's my industry sector analysis. This one's a good one if, for example, you have a new business coming to the region and they want to know a little bit about the market that they're moving into. So they want to know, okay, well, how many people actually work in food product manufacturing? What's actually happening in that sector? Do they have supply chain linkages? Can you talk to me about, do they export internationally, or is this just a small family operations canning their produce on their farm or whatever it might be? Then we've also got our time series industry sector analysis. And this allows me to see how that sector has changed over time. And I've got this on healthcare and social assistance. I'm going to my drop downs here, guys, and I've got my employment total. I can look at value add, I can look at output, I can look at FTE, I can look at import, local sales, worker productivity. I'm going to keep it on employment. And when I move down, it shows me what's happening in terms of employment in healthcare in this region. So this tool is really good for advocacy. If we are seeing growth in ageing in our community, we need to be seeing this chart here that I'm seeing now, and that's investment into healthcare and social assistance. If we are not seeing that, we need to advocate for better services in our region. So it's really important. It's about matching the story and pulling the story together. Here's our time series, our employment total annual change, and then our percentage of our benchmark in Queensland. So I would be looking at this saying, look, our healthcare is starting to catch up. We're still possibly not there, but we're on that road, certainly, which is an opportunity to keep your people in the region, but also to attract new people to the region as you create more services in the community. So that's my industry focus. That's a really good one. You can look at retail there, guys. You can look at all sorts of industries. The next one I'm going to go to is my resident workers. And this, I'm looking at the key statistics here. And this gives me an idea of what my workforce looks like in all different industries. So if I want to know what my retail trade workers look like, so who's employed there, how, what's the makeup of our workforce? We can see males versus females. We can see our age structure. So a lot of people will use this to keep an eye on their ag sector. as the ageing happens in the ag sector, and what happens for our renewal of skills in those industries. The top 3 occupations in retail: sales workers, managers, technicians, full-time versus part-time. How many have a bachelor or higher degree, advanced diploma, cert, no qualifications? So, you know, it's really thinking about, well, if we have a high percentage of people in retail with no qualifications, is there an opportunity to skill these guys to some level? That sort of thing. So we look at born overseas, speaks a language other than English. There's a whole range of variables you can look at. The other thing you can do is you can actually look at your field of qualification. So if you really want to drill down and start to go, well, if we've got people in retail that are, you know, qualified, what are they actually qualified in? We can see in engineering and related technologies. Okay, so we've got 40 people engineering related technology. We've got some people with health degrees, some people with ag, environmental and related studies. So there's all different forms of things that come under retail, but it's really interesting when you start to drill down and go, okay, well, here's how people are qualified in our community. And we can have a look at that compared to Queensland as well. So we can see a much higher level of no qualifications in Goondiwindi in retail compared to other areas in Queensland. So it's just really keeping an eye on, you know, how we're changing. I'm going to go to tourism and hospitality really quickly because I think you guys should have enough data in here to talk to me about this. So let's go straight down to the bottom because I want to see how your tourism industry is performing. And we can see in terms of our value of tourism and hospitality, we've had a fall between 18, 19 after we had sort of 3 years of growth. So tourism had a bit of a fall away. Let's have a look at our employment in that industry. Same thing, we had this growth through here and now we had a fall away between 18 and 19. Let's have a look at our visitor profile. Tourism visitor summary. Okay, we've only got our domestic visitor nights in here. So TRA data sometimes for our smaller communities doesn't provide us with the best information, but here we can see between 17, 18 and 18, 19, we had quite a significant increase in domestic visitor nights. This is something we're seeing across the board is that we are getting more people to our region, but they're not spending the money when they come here. So it's thinking about how we draw the value out of people when they come to the region, you know, whether it's through shopping, events, you know, tourism trails or that sort of thing. But certainly this isn't unique to this region. We're seeing an increase in visitor nights or visitors to regions, but we're not seeing that come through the data in terms of the value add to the community.
We get this at right like 5 o'clock, basically trying to find somewhere to stay and they're going to storage or somewhere else.
Yeah. So you're more of a stop then. So it's thinking, yeah, than a destination. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
That's a sleep, a breakfast, and then I go to the town.
Yeah. So it's thinking about, yeah, and it's thinking about how you create that destination. You know what I mean? How you create that appeal to be a destination to come and stay and do some additional visits. It's also, you know, a lot to do with the different way we travel now. So, and COVID is probably going to heighten that to some degree as, I mean, I know in Brizzy at the moment in Southeast Queensland, it's about a year-long wait on family caravans and that sort of thing. So, you know, people are changing the way they're travelling. It's going to take a long, long time for international tourism to get back to the point that it was, but also a long time for us to travel outside of Australia as well to significant destinations unless we have travel bubbles with particular areas. But certainly, you know, that's something we're keeping an eye on because if for the next 2 years, while you've got people that had the propensity to spend $30,000 or $40,000 a year on international travel, they're now just picking up caravans and going, well, we'll just caravan, you know. So yeah, it's a super interesting time to watch what's happening.
Data always tells you a story. You guys have just added the on the ground knowledge to the story that the data is telling us around that overnight stay and all the rest of it. So for like something like that, you can use that data to put together potentially a project to solve it. So an example of this was the Paru Progress Association, not looking at the data from what they knew of the ground, on the ground, was it takes tourists about 5.5 minutes to get a photo with the Cunnamulla fella. And outside of that, there's nothing else in Cunnamulla to keep you overnight. So they come up with this idea to turn their unused train station into a cinema. Because if it was a cinema, you'd have to watch it at night. So they applied for the Building Better Regions Fund, and we assisted them with the economic modelling, which Kat's going to get to if I stop interrupting her. And they're about to open that. They got that funding, they're about to open it, but really smart of the Progress Association to go, we know we need to increase our overnight stay. You know, like we're not even getting a cup of coffee out of these people. They do a photo and they go. So a really great project, and they were able to get the funding for it. So you guys have identified that issue. Maybe now the challenge is to, you know, as a community come up with some sort of solution. But the good thing is, it's not just come out of your heads. You've actually got some great data here to back you up that this is a problem. This is a need. So yeah, that's the beauty of data.
Yeah, and now is the time. Now is the time to really jump on those things. The next thing I'm going to show you is the COVID-19 economic forecast page. So this forecast page just runs you through all of that data that I provided in the presentation. Okay, so this is just going to keep you up to date with what's happening in your region. You know, down here, we talk about our local jobs. And when you come into here, guys, if you actually scroll over this particular area, in ag, forestry and fishing at the moment, we've got 3 jobs compensated by JobKeeper. Okay, if I go to healthcare and social assistance, we've got 9 jobs compensated by JobKeeper. Same with retail trade, 3. I've got 3 in education and training. I've got 2 here in other services. I've got 1 in construction. So you're able to hover over those particular areas to showcase how many people are being kept with the JobKeeper. Yep. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Anything west of, you know, the Great Divide, we haven't had a massive effect of COVID. So honestly, like, you know, outside of this room, we'll keep crying poor so we can get more funding.
Yeah, absolutely.
But inside this room and on the recording, we fed very well, and the data and the stats show that. So yeah, there were those, you know, some of the tricky applications and things, but generally speaking, they're minor to when you look at the data. Haven't been affected too badly at all, and to be honest, there's some real winners out of COVID. And then the flip side is, there are some very, very sad stories. So generally speaking, regional Queensland, we're doing okay.
And also, there's been some good stimulus packages that have, the $25,000 grant for new builds. Cairns is recording better local sales June this year than it was June the year before. So, and most regional areas are reporting back to us with that same growth. So, there's been some support packages that have actually done their job. They have stimulated construction. They have stimulated those sorts of things. JobKeeper has been very good at hiding the real shock of those social distancing impacts. you know, we will see as we move throughout that program what that looks like. But certainly, you know, even things like getting access to your super early has shielded a lot of heartache and problems in some people, and it's also provided stimulus in the renovation you know, movement around people accessing that super and getting it to, you know, get their new telly and their new whatever and getting things done. So yeah, absolutely. So certainly there's been some things out there that have helped as well. So the last thing we're going to look at, guys, is the economic impact model.
Everything Kat has run you through so far is totally and utterly publicly available for RDA going down Southwest, our 10 councils, and there's a separate portal that amalgamates the 6 most Western councils, so it's called Southwest Red, mainly because sometimes their data is very small. So, and they had a choice of using just their council data, like Fulham has a total population of 255. You know, when you're looking at some of their data, that's not even thought of in federal government land as a sample size. But that is actually legitimately their whole population. So they could use theirs or they could use Boys only down Southwest, which is ridiculously skewed by Toowoomba. It's half the population of this region. So it's skewed. And so we did put a line halfway through, and the 6 councils out west to get another portal. Yeah, so this tool though that Kat's lining up for you now, the economic impact model, you do need a password for it, only because we're not trying to hide anything. It's just that you need a bit of training in it, and we don't want people doing the wrong report and attaching that to a grant that then causes them not to get the grant, you know. So this is why.
Okay, so let's come up here, and so this is your page. This is your economic impact model. This talks about how we use the model and how the model sort of works. When we move down here, typically what will happen when you have a project is your project will be delivered in 2 stages. You'll have a construction phase and then you'll have that operational phase. Sometimes it's just an operational phase. It's we're going to have a new, you know, 5 new lawyers move to town or something like that. So you just have that operational phase. But most of the time when we're going for our bigger grants, our BBRF, we'll be looking at a construction and an operational phase. So the first thing we do, I'm going to talk about a community. We did today the one that's happening in Boulogne at the moment around the community centre. And the first thing we did was we put in building and construction, and that building project is going to cost 3.5 million to deliver that project. So in here we put 3.5 million. Okay, and I'm just going to put community centre, and I submit that information through the model. So we've got building construction, it's a community centre, and now it gives us our detailed information on how that money moves through the economy and what the economic impact is on the Shire, okay, or the regional council area. So the first thing we look at is our building construction sector in Goondiwindi, and this is what it's made up of, 30.23 million in terms of output. Then we come down here and we talk about our direct impact on the building construction sector is 3.5 million. So that's how much the project costs. Our industrial impact, so this is when we start to buy our steel and we've got to buy fencing and we've got to buy bricks and cement and different things. We've got our industrial impact is 3.18 million. Our consumption impact is then what your workers spend on retail or accommodation or whatever it might be, is 1.29 million in terms of consumption impact. So the total impact on the regional council economy is 7.96 million. So we started with 3.5 million, and as that money moves through the economy, so if this project takes us 6 months, as it moves through the economy, it will be equivalent to $7.96 million worth of value to the local council area. So when you put in your application and they say, what is the economic impact of this project on the Goondiwindi Council, that is what your total impact will be. Then we've got under here your multipliers. So this is your type 1 multiplier and your type 2 multiplier. They differ for every council throughout Australia, and they determine how that money moves through your local economy. And the reason why that's important is because a construction worker in Gundy is very different and has different spending behaviours than a construction worker in Sydney or a construction worker in Cunnamulla or Charleville or whatever it might be. So it's making sure you have that independence around your particular model. Then we've got the impact on the Queensland economy, and we have our total impact. So if, for example, we are going for this grant with the Queensland economy, you will put there that your total impact on the Queensland economy is 8.52 million. And that's because we will buy things from outside of this region in order to build this project. It might be that our architect is in Brisbane. It may mean that our finance guy is in Toowoomba, whatever it might be. It will be that, you know, that money going outside of the region as well. Then we've got our impact on the Australian economy, which is 9.68 million. So you can export this particular chart and it will come into here. So we'll come into here and we can see our starting position. So you've got all of that data there that you can use and put straight into a thing. Then when we come back here, you've also got all this commentary down the bottom. So impact on output, and it explains to you how the calculation comes about. So you've got all of this detail down the bottom: impact on local employment, value add, GRP. It also talks to you about what sectors the jobs will be in. Because when you create jobs in construction, it's not just the construction industry that benefits. It's also 3 people in manufacturing, 2 in wholesale, or 1 in wholesale trade, 2 in retail, 1 in accommodation, 1 in transport, postal, warehousing, etc., etc. So it gives you those flow-on effects from the project as well. So what you can do is you can export this information into Word or PDF. I would export it into Word and then take out all the bits that you don't need for your grant application. Okay, so that's my construction phase. Then I'll have an operational phase, and my operational phase of this particular centre in Ballon in St George, there will be 3 people employed to run the library. So then we click on jobs. Okay, so your construction phase is almost always in sales. Your operational phase is almost always in jobs. Okay, because you might have, and you may need to run that 3 times. You may have an industrial shed that's going to have a, you know, a cafe in it, as well as a, you know, a manufacturing little hub. It might have all of these different services that suddenly you now have to look through and go, okay, well, we're going to have some people from food product manufacturing. We're going to have some people from retail. We're going to have some people from fuel retailing, because it might have a service station, whatever it might be. So it's really looking at where those jobs fit. So we submit that through the model. We've got public administration. I've got 3 jobs are going to come out of this centre, and there's exactly the same deal, guys. We come through, we've got our direct impact, our industrial and our consumption. So the total impact on the Goondiwindi Regional Council economy is 1.1 million from this particular centre. Then we come down here, our impact is 1.19 million in terms of our Queensland economy, and then we've got our total impact on the Australian economy. So the time frame is, so it's basically for the life of the project, which is, you know, so it's $1.1 million worth of benefit will come straight into the economy over the life of how long they stay. So you get all of that detail in here around, you know, if the project takes 3 years to build, you divide it by 3. So it gives you all of that detail in there of how to manage it. If you have those sorts of questions and it gets confusing and you think, am I dividing, am I multiplying, what am I doing here? Then you send it through to Trudy, and she will, Tim will either work it out or she will send it to me and I will work it out for you. And Ballon Shire last year, I was handing in applications for them at the 11th hour. So, you know, we're here.
But the digital connectivity one.
Yeah, so it's
Monday, Tuesday.
Yeah, so it's just,
At least time earlier.
Yeah.
Don't leave it to the last day.
The application's finished, I'm thinking.
I'm just gonna quickly share with Nikki, because you're not here in the room, the expressions that were on people's faces is one of quite shocked as to the multiplier. And believe me, when I first started doing these reports, I was like, holy crap, who's doing this? The good thing is the National Economics Institute, where ID use it and where they get their data from, is recognised by state and federal government as it being a real number. It is not that you have just all of a sudden plucked something out of the air.
yes,
The good thing is you can quote this and they know that this is real. So that's why this is so handy to use. They know it's not just your thoughts on what it should be. So I really recommend you to get in touch, and we can do those economic impact modelling for you, because it's known to be a valid source. You know,
Yep.
Even though you, believe me, the first few times I was like you, I was like, it was quite colourful language as to how the hell does that happen? But it's all based in actual facts, and the good thing is the ID one is it does even take into account your local history of how that money flows on.
and it's how people spend their money in your community. So we can see how people spend money in your community. And one of the things in Australia that is really interesting is we have a very high spending rate. We actually spend often more than we earn. So, you know, as the money reverberates through the economy, that's why you see such high multipliers. So it is really interesting to watch it, watch the back end.
Different industries, just to see the difference in the multiplier. So I say construction is the one. That's why they're putting so much stimulus into construction at the moment.
Yes,
The other one that's always massive is mining.
yes.
Put anything into mining, it's crazy. But
Construction has probably one of the highest multipliers, because there are a variety of inputs that go into it, whereas retail and things like that you don't have the inputs that go into it. So it's really thinking about where you get your product. And yeah, they're not bad.
They're not bad. They're still a multiplier. Yeah, that's for sure. So we had a medical marijuana plant going into Toowoomba, and so that was fun to try and find what industry am I putting medical marijuana under. So we tried 3 different ones. I think I did horticulture for one, I did ag manufacturing for another. I didn't pick mining and construction because I knew the multiplier was good. I still picked industries that kind of made sense, but somebody's put medical marijuana processing in there as a field. So sometimes it's a bit tricky, but
Yeah.
you've got to work your way through it. And I suppose it's funny because I know who's in the room. We always say, generally speaking, there's a construction phase and there's the delivery phase, and usually that's always dollars and the deliveries jobs. The one that Houghton would do as a program that's dollars skew. So Skilling Queenslanders for Work is a brilliant grant, really great, but quite often you're asking for money to fund a program. You're not doing bricks and mortar. And in that example, we will do the economic impact modelling on dollars, for a program, not just where normally we go jobs on that sort of level. But for SKU, you can't, like, if you're applying 200,000 for, putting 10 new trainees, if that program dollar has got a flow effect.
Yeah.
You can put that in as dollars then instead of jobs. Yeah. So it's probably the main example in the last 2 years that we've done
Opposite way.
Opposite way,
Yeah.
opposite way, because it is decent money and it does have a flow effect.
Yes.
But it's not construction, and you're better off giving the jobs. Yeah. You're not really, sometimes you're not actually employing your people to deliver those programs. Getting some good money to deliver those programs. Health sometimes can be a bit like that too. So just keep that in mind. But if you talk to us, we kind of work out, well, we'll do one on this and one on that. As Kat said, sometimes it's multiple reports. It doesn't add up all the reports for you, but you can, refer to them all
Just export
and
them
add
out.
them up. Like that one project, this much construction, that much of delivery.
So last thing, guys, I did say that was the last thing, but this is the last thing. You can also get some reporting done in the economics program. So you can print out all of your economic indicators for Goondiwindi. You can select the topics that you want, email that to yourself in Word or PDF, so same as your community profile. So that's everything. Does anyone have any questions?
I do, just in relation to probably the border issue for us. So some data, like for population and bits and pieces, we're applying to things. Like, yeah, like we take you like a bit of New South Wales for our community, which is basically, about extracting data so that you can actually realise who our actual community is. It's not about boundaries. So
I think I've spoken to your old, I don't know whether he's still the same mayor. Yeah, about this previously, but I'm not sure whether Maury have this data. I know that we spoke to them after we spoke to the mayor last time. I can look into it, but yeah, it's a really good point. Look, and it really is about trying to create that boundary, the correct boundary. So what we did for Cowra at the moment, so Cowra has our profile tool, so they've got an economy light program, which is really not that great. And what we did was we created a catchment area for them. So if you need to create a catchment, that would be something you could email Trudy about and say, look, Trudy, we wanted to create this catchment to showcase, because Cowra wants to build a medical services centre sort of hub. And that particular area takes in parts of, I can't even think of the names right now, but, you know, a variety of these other smaller regions outside of it. So Cowra's population might be, 15,000, but when you start to take into consideration all of the various localities, you can see that can be bolstered almost up to, 40 or 50,000 people. So it's thinking about how you create that catchment, what you think that catchment is, and then we can create those boundaries for you. We can't give you the economic data for that. What we can give you is really those population numbers of what we think that could look like, potentially. Yeah.
There's none for Maury and there's none for RDA, far north New South Wales. Northern Rivers have.
Northern Rivers have.
Northern Rivers, New South Wales, RDA.
Byron's, I think.
But not the inland RDA. So not.
I'll talk to one of my colleagues.
I think that we actually need to be able to get that data as a region.
Yeah.
But yourselves, education. Oh, it's actually
Yeah. The other one that I use quite often, but we'd have to have a look at New South Wales state government. On Treasury, you can get regional profiles. Now, it won't have as much of the economic data, it has more the demographic data, but you can go onto Queensland Treasury, and what I like about it is you can actually tap on, say, 3 councils. So you could go Maranoa, Goondiwindi, and Paru, and it adds everything up for you and puts it in a report. Your problem is you'd have to get New South Wales Treasury stuff, and you'd have to get yours and then add it together. What I like about the Treasury one is if I've got odd councils that are working together on something, I can tap on a couple of them and it does that reporting and summarises it up for me. It's not as good as ID because it doesn't have that economic stuff, but it's certainly got all the, like, what's in the community profile and a little bit of the economic stuff, but definitely what's in the demographic ones, the community one.
If you can email Trudy about that, just because I know at the moment the guy that looks after sort of northern New South Wales has had some inquiries from that particular area. So whether or not we've had so many inquiries, of course, because of COVID, and we've built, I think, maybe 10 RDA sites in the last 6 months. So I just would need to look into whether or not that's one of the ones that is in the pipeline or how that works, because if it is, you'll be able to access it.
So to get into that page, you use the password.
Only the economic impact model.
Not this.
So not this. This is all public. That Trudy will give you that one, I think.
So like the DAF guys, when they were doing the regional economic development grants, those red grants, they were like having to do last minute reports and all the rest of it. And I end up saying to Justin and Jason, can you just come in? We'll do a half-hour training together, and I'll give you the whole passwords for the 12 portals we've done. You know, so they've got it.
Yeah.
The only thing I can do now, but I would say is for a while, like, and quite often, like I think you guys do this a bit, and go to consulting do it a bit. They will email Tim, and they'll email a report they ran, and Tim can have a look at it and go, oh, you probably missed this, or you probably. So we have had an aged care facility send us a report to say we've already done this, and they had I can't remember the figure, it was 2.3 million or something in aged care. And it was 2.3 million in construction. You're not spending 2.3 million in aged care. You're constructing a facility first. So they could have lost, they could lose that grant over the fact that that isn't accurate, you know. So that's the only reason why we hesitate. And ID Profile have got that. ID Profile have got that as a default on all of them.
What default?
The password.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
just the default for us on the ID.
Pretty much, yeah.
And then it's up to us who give it out to. And I do give it out to them freely. But I would just say for a while, run it and get in there and play with it.
Oh.
But then send us the support. So that would be the other thing is any grant that you're applying for, your full basic letters of support should always be Fed, State, Council, RDA. There's 4 letters of support straight up. You should have your federal member, your state member, your council, and us. Like they're a basic that and grant, like when they're choosing through grants, they will look and see if you've got those 4 ticked off, you know. And then depending on what you're applying for, you should make your other letters of support specific to what you're applying for. So when you do a SKU application for a Cert 3 in retail, you're best off going getting letters of support from retail-based businesses. You know, so you make it applicable to whatever the criteria of the grant is. So, so certainly you guys all the time send us emails about, can Tim do me a letter of support for this, and here's the report. So they've already done the report, but at least we've then got it to go and pick up the time when the aged care thing was whacked. We were like, oh, to do that. So. My email and Tim's email, I have given them to Nikki, who is already lining up a meeting for me in Toowoomba. So Tim is admin at rda-ddsw.org.au, and I am director at. So they're pretty easy. They're publicly available. They're on the website. You guys should all have Tim's anyway, because he would have sent you the full info about coming tonight. But yeah, feel free to let us know, and just get in. I always say get in there and play with it. You can't break it, but I think I've got to stop saying it because we might jinx it and we'll break it.
Yeah,
We've been saying that.
we have been saying it a lot.
We have been saying it a lot. So get in there, have a play with it. You know, have a look what's in there. Really understand first of all the criteria of the grant that you're going for. But if you're needing data for another purpose, be really clear on what is the purpose, what's the story you're trying to say, and then look for that data, because CAB hasn't even touched the tip of it. You know, and you saw from the little things down the bottom of both the green and the red tab, there is a lot of data in there. Nikki, if you have no other questions apart from us continuing to organise the time to catch up.
No, I'm fine. Thank you. That was amazing and so helpful.
You're brilliant. So glad you are online.
Thank you. Thank you guys for coming.
Yeah.